Greetings, students. Welcome to Module 2 of Practice and Theory of Counseling, fall semester. First thing I want to discuss with you about Module 2 is this is the first time now that you're going to be actually in the discussion area. So I think it's a real good thing for us to go over the rubric for the discussion area so that you completely understand. You're going to be broken into, broken is a bad word. You're going to be separated into a set of 4 groups. The group listing may change if we have students who drop the course and add the course. So whatever you see is from a group listing standpoint in the discussion area is what you really need to focus on, and that's where you are, at least for the group discussion in Module 2. So let's look at the rubric. This is really important because you know how important the discussion area is to me from an evaluation standpoint. The post must be made within the required time frame. In other words, make that deadline or you'll be penalized from a standpoint of points that you get for your posts. And the due dates will be given in each discussion area, but as a general rule, the deadline for initial posting is going to be the Tuesday that the module is open on the previous Saturday. And then the module will close before the assessments are available to you online. Now, the discussion won't close, it'll still be there, you just won't get any points if you post after then, okay? Post must include new information. Now, in Module 2, that's not going to be hard to do at all because the way Module 2 is laid out is each group has a set of questions. For instance, Group 1 has 6 questions because there are 6 people in Group 1. So what you might want to do is meet among yourselves some way, email or however you want to do it. Somebody take the initiative in the group to contact the others to say, I'll take question 1, what question would you like to take, or whatever. So you have an email, a group email for your group, and as we go through the semester you can assign each other different questions. Okay, I'm not going to assign a question per person, but it's questions per group. So that's what you're going to want to do, especially in Module 2. So each post is going to have some new information, and as we go forward in the other modules, remember that. And the post, I mean, you can't just say, oh yes, I agree with you, or oh, me too, or something like that. It's got to have new information in it. Now, the other thing about the groups, this is very important. I will require that you post outside your own group. So if you've been given a question in Module 2 and you only post about that question, you will not receive the maximum points in the discussion area. Post outside your group, okay? So new information according to the content or research or some reliable resource. If you bring in new information that's not talked about in the content, like in the text that you've been assigned or in the PowerPoints, you must cite or reference and tell where you got that information. If it's information you come up with from your heart, then you don't have to cite anything. We can tell it's from your heart. Posts containing personal views on the content should be backed up with some kind of sound reasoning and good explanations. And you'll see more about that in the dozen do's listing for page 2. Posts must show that the students are involved in the discussion area. Okay, so you can't just off the handle throw something in there that has been referred to somewhere else and you haven't read it yet. So you got to read the other areas outside your group and within your group. Okay, so in order to receive the maximum number of points for the discussion area, you've got to post at least 3 times, okay? and they must be, the first one must be before the deadline. And a couple of modules we have 2 discussion areas, so the deadlines will be the same, but the rules will apply to each of the discussion areas. So in each discussion area, you can make 20 points. If you've made the initial deadline and you've posted 3 times, not only in your group, but somewhere in other groups. 15 points if you make the initial deadline and you only make 2 posts. 10 points if you make the initial deadline and just make 1 point. Okay, so you see how important the initial deadline is to me. Because if you miss the additional deadline and you still do 3 posts, you only get 15 points. If you miss the initial deadline and only make 2, you get 10, and if you miss the initial deadline and only make 1, you get 5 points. And of course, 0 for no posts, okay? So looking at the dozen do's, okay? Review the discussion thread thoroughly before you enter your post. Very important. Maintain the threads by using the reply button rather than starting a new topic. And when you start a new topic, always include the subject line. Don't just leave it blank, okay? But there's a subject line available to you in the discussion forum area. Now, the rest of these are honestly common sense. Don't make inflammatory statements to each other. Be patient and read the comments of other group members thoroughly before entering your remarks, and respond in a thoughtful and timely manner if someone else in the discussion area asks you a question about your post. Use the fonts that are standard to the discussion area, and especially when you're in the open forum area, really be sure to thoroughly state your issue so everybody's going to understand your question. And I will try to thoroughly state the answer if I have an answer. Large documents should not be attached, but if you need more space than you think the discussion area really warrants, you can attach something. But honestly, I would rather you use the discussion area space rather than attaching documents, okay? Now, when you're emailing each other, these things apply as well, obviously. But those are your dozen do's for the discussion and the evaluation of the discussion area. And let's real quick go over the rubric for the self-analysis paper, since that's due while you're going to be in Module 2 here. It's straightforward. You're on your worldview, your personal identity, your family identity, your religious or spiritual position, then the personality and values section. And yes, it's only 5 points of the total 50, but it's 5 points. And if you don't state what your results of the Myers-Briggs type indicator from the link, from the Humanetrics assessment that you've done, you're not going to get these 5 points. Then tell how your personality from that Humanetrics assessment is going to play into your career decision, whether you're going to go forward this or not. And then, of course, listing your top 2 values. Paper's got to be turned in by the deadline. You get 10 points for that. And be sure at the end of it that you have summarized in a brief paragraph what you hope to gain from this class and your goals for taking the class. And if it's just that, hey, I needed 3 more hours and I didn't know where to go, that's fine. There's not going to be any judgment on my part as to why you're taking it, but I do want your answer to that question in this paper. And then you need to summarize the paper finally. What I have written about is my worldview, and it very briefly stated it is da-da-da. Summarize the end of the paper altogether at the end. A lot of people miss doing that. So that's due on September 13th into the Dropbox. We have a plagiarism detector. So there you go to start us off with Module 2. Now let's look at, and you actually have this PowerPoint presentation in D2L, so feel free to go over feel free to open this PowerPoint in D2L if you'd like to, or you can just follow it on screen here. This is, of course, about the profession of counseling. The objectives relate to two of the things that are written, the outcome statements that are written in the syllabus. First, you will explore the profession of counseling in this module and ways to reach people with differences from you, okay? And then you are going to examine codes of ethics. We will be looking at the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics, ACA, and the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics, NASW. There's also a listing of school counselors, American School Counselors Code of Ethics. So what we hope to gain in this study of the ethical codes is principles such as confidentiality, informed consent, duty to warn. In fact, as I remember your assessment on Module 2, these items, you'll need to know the definitions of these items to take your assessment at the end of Module 2. Privileged communication, boundary issues, dual relationships, and of course, multicultural values and counselor impairment. So here's what's in D2L. Getting tongue-tied here. Here's what's in D2L. Basically, every module will contain first the introductory video and then the PowerPoint that I use in the introductory video. And the third thing will be the directions for study, which include your discussion items that are in the discussion forum. The PowerPoints in this D2L content are about the worldview, and it gives a full definition of worldview, and about multicultural considerations in counseling. In D2L also, what we used to have as a course reserve, we have now in D2L available to you, and that's portions of the text that you were not required to buy, but that you are required to read from New Krug and from Ivy and Ivy. There's a long listing of items in D2L, and when you open up the module, you'll look at it and you'll say, oh my gosh, there's no way I'm going to be able to cover all of that in the allotted time. Well, I think it's just become familiar with it, and through the discussion questions, then I think you're going to have enough to understand what's in there and get ready for your assessment at the end of the module. So don't let the amount of content in D2L blow you away, okay? I think we'll be able to cover it. There are identity development and human growth models that are in this module as well. They're simply there to familiarize you with them, okay? Later on, we'll probably talk more about the stages of growth, and you'll see them on maybe a later assessment. But right now, identity development and growth models, as far as I can remember, are not in your assessment for this module. But I do want you to just be familiar with them, because lots of times when clients come in to see you as a counselor, it's good to know what stage of growth they're in and how they identify with themselves. And there are models, especially about multicultural and diverse clients. There's a biracial model of development, there's a white identity model of development, and there's an ethnic or racial identity development model. Those, to me, are more important than the growth models. The growth models that are there are Piaget and Erickson and a couple or three more. Those are just really things of interest for you, and there will be questions in the discussion area about them. Then, a very important part of counseling is assessments. There's a PowerPoint on assessments in your D2L, and there's a couple of assessments that are reviewed. The Beck Depression Inventory is reviewed, in D2L there. And then the mental health status exam, I especially want you to pay some attention to that. That's going to be on your assessment, as I remember. Know something about the mental health status exam. Just get the feel of what's in there, okay? And know the different types of assessments you would use if you were a different type of counselor. For instance, a school counselor might use this type of assessment versus another assessment, whereas a community agency counselor might use something different. So just to give you a little bit of information on the assessment when you come to it, which we aren't coming to it yet, so let me back up. Sorry about that. I was getting ahead of myself here. It's very important for you to know the definition of counseling, and I've used the one from the American Counseling Association here. It's a professional relationship that empowers diverse individuals, families, and groups to accomplish mental health, wellness, education, and career goals. I mean, that, how more concise can you say? That is what counseling is. And that's the definition I would like you to recognize and use. I think there might be a fill-in-the-blank question about that on the assessment. And there are forces, or I would say stages of counseling theories as we begin to study them. First, we were into the behaviorism and psychodynamic forces. Then we get humanistic, and then we get into multiculturalism and applying that in counseling theory. So in this module, you're going to explore through reading New Krug and the Ivy texts, types of professionals, organizations that certify and license, know the difference between certification and license. Assessment question would be good on that. Professional groups, problem-solving methods are in there as well. There's 2 that are listed, and you can take those 2 and apply them to a problem that's listed in New Krug's text. And then we can't get into anything about counseling unless we talk about Carl Rogers and his empathy model and about counselor effectiveness. New Krug, in his text, I believe he lists the things that make counseling effective. The client readiness to change. I mean, you can do the counseling 30 days till Sunday, till the cows come home, as we say in East Tennessee, right? And if the client's not ready to change, you're not going to see any change. Psychological resources sometimes. People don't have the psychological resource and stamina to make changes. Social supports are necessary, and in theories that you use, using evidence-based factors, very, very important to your effectiveness. And then the counselor's ability to develop a strong working alliance, and I think Carl Rogers probably believes that that is the most important. This next slide shows you several of common factors that successful counselors have. And number 1 is empathy. And this is taken a lot from Carl Rogers. What our next slide is about, mostly about that. Empathy, acceptance, and genuineness, all Carl Rogers theories in the person-centered theory. Embracing wellness, having cultural competence, and then New Krug talks about an it factor that you will read about. The compatibility with and a belief in theory, that's why we do a selected theory paper that comes due sometime in November. Competence and cognitive complexity as well. Now, this is something that, if you remember nothing else from this course, I want you to remember Rogers' empathy model. Roger believes that a therapist must accurately sense the feelings and personal meanings of the client. You must accurately sense that, and not only must you accurately sense that, you must let the client know, you must communicate with the client your sensing of the client's experience. And it is all about the client's experience. And that the therapist so deeply senses and understands the client's experience that the therapist can go just below the client's level of awareness about this experience. It is the client's experience, but the therapist senses it so well that, and this comes from inside, this doesn't come from a book. And to me, that is New Krug's id factor, that ability to do what Rogers is talking about here. It includes empathetic listening and unconditional positive regard. Anytime you hear those three words, unconditional positive regard, you think of Carl Rogers, because that's what he says you must have as a counselor for the client, balanced with challenging the client to change. So it's not that you have such a positive regard for this client that you're not going to ask them to move forward. So you got to balance that. So be sure you know about Rogers' empathetic model. Ethics. The portion on ethics that we are going to cover are written here. Confidentiality is the hallmark of counseling. There's a document in D2L that lists the exceptions to confidentiality. There are exceptions to confidentiality, and you should know those. You'll also learn about dual relationships, counselor impairment, duty to warn. We'll talk about that in the discussion area. And then there are ethics codes listed there. I think if you remember nothing else from the ethics, the first principle is do no harm. Okay, then we get to the multicultural competencies for counseling. And first, the counselor's got to be aware of her or his own biases, and we all have them. And that awareness, of course, needs to be ameliorated or put into balance when you have a client from another culture. And I don't mean just a different ethnicity. There may be a city culture and a country culture of the same ethnicity. So it's not just race and ethnicity. The counselor must be aware of her or his own worldview. That's why you do assignment 1. And you've got to also know some culturally appropriate intervention strategies. I mean, it's even acceptable to have a cultural coach, if the client agrees to that, come into your sessions, as long as the client agrees to that lack of privacy, to help the therapist understand and get into that client's experience so that you can get underneath it with the client. In the Ivy and Ivy text, there's a problem that's presented by the parent of an 8-year-old, and then it has different theoretical approaches to it. I really want you to read that text. That's going to be sort of your introduction to the beginning of the theories that we're going to learn as well. Also, the assessments that I had mentioned earlier that are in there, the Beck Depression Inventory and the Mental Status Exam. The identity models are all there, and then the human development models. So here's something about your Module 2 assessment. It's going to be held Thursday. It's going to be held Friday, starting at noon through Saturday evening. And the discussion forum posts will not be counted after Thursday evening, okay? And I think there is one other area that I may have stated that the discussion forum posts would not be counted after noon on the assessment day. That is incorrect. If you see that anywhere, this statement right here is the correct one. The discussion forum posts will not be counted after Thursday evening. That way, if you want to go back and look at the discussion area, there's nothing new that's going to be in there before you take your assessment. Assessment opens Friday at noon, and goes through Saturday at almost midnight, minute before midnight. There are 9 true-false questions, 3 multiple choice, 2 matching, and 3 fill-in-the-blanks. Of course, the fill-in-the-blanks are worth more than the others. The others are just a point apiece. So good luck with Module 2. Go to the open forum if you have questions, and I'll see you on the discussion board.